Part 1, The Painter of Secrets. What if I told you that one of the most mysterious painters of the 20th century once said, "A line is a dot that went for a walk." It sounds innocent, almost childlike. Yet behind those words lies a haunting truth. Paul Klee was a man who spent his life caught between two worlds, light and shadow, music and silence, reality and dreams. His art? It doesn't simply hang on walls. It breathes. It whispers. It stares back. To this day, people stand before his paintings with unease, as if each line and color hides a secret message, a code left behind by a man who could not decide whether he belonged to this world at all. But how did a quiet Swiss-German boy become one of the most enigmatic voices in modern art? How did a child who once sketched fantastical beasts in the margins of his schoolbooks grow into the man whose last works, painted while his body was breaking apart from a cruel disease, still feel alive, almost supernatural? This is not just a biography. This is a journey through obsession, tragedy, rebellion, and creation. This is the story of Paul Klee, the artist who painted the invisible. Childhood, born between notes and colors. Paul Klee was born in 1879 in Münchenbuchsee, Switzerland, into a household filled not with brushes but with music. His father, Hans, was a music teacher. His mother, Ida, a trained singer. From the very beginning, Paul was torn between two worlds, the structured discipline of music and the wild, formless freedom of art. Imagine a boy sitting by candlelight. Outside, snow falls silently against the glass. Inside, his father plays the violin with rigid precision, each note crisp, exact. But Paul? He stares at the shadows the candle throws on the wall. With a piece of charcoal, he begins to trace them. Not the real figures, not the literal world, but the movement of shadows, the invisible spirit behind them. As a child, Klee's notebooks were filled with fantastical creatures, hybrid animals, insects with human faces, and landscapes that bent reality itself. He was, in his own words, more at home in the night than in the day. And already a quiet tragedy stirred. Paul did not fit in. Other children saw the world in plain terms. Paul saw everything as code, as symbols. He felt alien, misunderstood, set apart. That loneliness would stay with him forever, shaping his art into something strange, something both beautiful and unsettling. The choice? Music or painting? By the time he was a teenager, the pressure from his parents was clear. Paul should be a musician. He was gifted with the violin, and his teachers believed he could have a career in music. But Paul resisted. Music was too rigid, too bound by rules. He wanted something freer, something that could escape time itself. In his diary, the young Klee wrote, "Art does not reproduce the visible, it makes visible." This was not just a statement, it was a declaration of war against tradition, against realism, against the idea that art was simply a mirror of life. For Paul, art was a portal. He left home for Munich, against the expectations of his parents, determined to become an artist. But the path would be brutal, filled with failure, rejection, and ridicule. His early drawings were mocked for being too strange, too childlike. Critics told him he lacked seriousness, that he would never be more than a dilettante. But Paul Klee was not just painting what he saw. He was painting what he felt. And that made him dangerous. The obsession with line. Klee became obsessed with the simplest of things, the line. Not as decoration, not as boundary, but as life itself. He would sketch endlessly, twisting, curling, stretching lines that became strange hybrid forms. Cats with human smiles. Trees that looked like skeletons. Children's toys turned sinister. To outsiders it looked whimsical, even playful. But inside Klee's studio it was something else. His wife Lily would sometimes find him late at night, hunched over a canvas, muttering to himself, his hands trembling as if the lines were being pulled out of him rather than drawn. He once confessed, "I cannot be grasped in the here and now, for I live as much with the dead as with the unborn." Somewhat closer to the heart of creation than is usual, but not nearly close enough. That single thought haunted him. He was not simply a painter. He was a messenger caught between the living and the eternal. Part 2, The Awakening of a Visionary. The Struggle for Recognition. When Paul Klee first arrived in Munich to study art, he was not welcomed as a prodigy. In fact, he was considered almost a joke. His professors looked at his early drawings, twisted, playful, filled with strange creatures, and dismissed him. "You have talent," one teacher reportedly told him, "but it is the wrong kind of talent." 4 years, Klee felt like an exile even within the art world. He studied diligently, copying the works of masters, experimenting with etching, trying to discipline his unruly imagination. Yet every time he attempted to paint realistically, it was as if his hand betrayed him, The results were stiff, lifeless. But when he let himself go, when he allowed his inner world to spill onto the page, something extraordinary happened. Suddenly, his sketches pulsed with energy, with humor, with mystery. He began to realize, his childlike style was not a weakness. It was his weapon. The turning point, Paris. In 1905, desperate and restless, Klee traveled to Paris. The city was alive with artistic revolution. Impressionists, post-impressionists, and a rising wave of modernists were tearing apart the old traditions. In the galleries, Klee encountered the works of Cézanne, Van Gogh, and above all, Picasso. He felt both awe and despair. These men were giants already reshaping the world of art. Who was he compared to them? Yet Paris gave him something priceless: courage. He wrote in his diary, "My mirror declares, you are not really a painter. But I will paint nevertheless." It was in Paris too that Klee discovered color in a new way. He visited exhibitions of French fauve, wild, bold painters like Matisse, who threw color on canvas as if it were fire. Klee felt shaken. Until then his art was dominated by line, by black and white etchings. Color terrified him. But after Paris, it began to haunt him. The meeting that changed everything, Kandinsky. Back in Munich, Klee's life took a dramatic turn when he met a group of artists who would later be known as the Der Blaue Reiter, the Blue Rider. Among them was the towering figure of Vasily Kandinsky, a Russian painter who was already exploring abstraction. Kandinsky was older, charismatic, a visionary in his own right. He saw something in Klee that others missed, a unique voice and imagination unlike anyone else's. Their friendship would become one of the most important in Klee's life. Kandinsky once told him, "You are a natural mystic. You paint what others cannot even see." For Klee these words were oxygen. At last, someone recognized the truth of his vision. The journey to Tunisia. Then came the trip that changed everything. In 1914, Paul Klee traveled with fellow painters Auguste Mack and Louis Moilier to Tunisia. Imagine the scene. A European artist accustomed to the gray skies of Switzerland suddenly standing beneath the blinding North African sun. The walls of the Medina shimmer in red and orange. Palm trees cut black silhouettes against a sky of impossible blue. The markets explode with fabrics, spices, and music. For Klee it was a revelation. One evening, as he painted in the fading light, he experienced what he later described as a moment of pure transformation. In his diary he wrote the words that would define his career. "Color has taken possession of me, no longer do I have to chase after it. I know that it has me forever. Color and I are one. I am a painter." It was as if he had been reborn. From that moment on his works began to glow. No longer merely whimsical line drawings, his paintings became radiant mosaics of color, alive with rhythm and harmony. War and darkness. But just as his career was about to bloom, tragedy struck. The First World War erupted, tearing Europe apart. Klee's friend Auguste Mack was killed almost immediately on the front. Kandinsky was forced to return to Russia. The Blue Rider group collapsed. Klee himself was drafted into the German army in 1916. Though he avoided the front lines, he was assigned to a desk job. The war scarred him deeply. He painted during rare moments of quiet, producing works filled with fragile, dreamlike figures that seemed to hover on the edge of existence. He wrote, "The more terrifying the world becomes, the more art becomes abstract." Klee survived the war, but something inside him had shifted. His art was no longer just playful. It carried within it a quiet mourning, a sense of humanity adrift in chaos. Rise at the Bauhaus. After the war, Klee's reputation grew rapidly. He was invited to join the Bauhaus, the revolutionary German art school founded by Walter Gropius. At Bauhaus, Klee became both a teacher and a legend. His lectures were unlike anything students had ever experienced. He didn't simply teach technique. He spoke about art as if it were a living organism. One of his most famous lessons began with a single point drawn on the chalkboard. "This," he told his students, "is the beginning. The point moves. It becomes a line. The line moves. It becomes a plane. The plane moves. It becomes space." For students, it was like being initiated into a secret language of creation. Kandinsky, who also taught at Bauhaus, once joked that Klee's classroom was the temple of mysteries. During this period, Klee created some of his most iconic works: strange, geometric compositions filled with bright squares, playful figures, cryptic symbols. His art seemed to exist halfway between painting and music, like scores for a silent, eternal symphony. Part 3: Exile, Illness, and the Fire Within. Shadows over Germany. By the late 1920s, Paul Klee was at the height of his fame. His works hung in major exhibitions across Europe. Critics praised him as one of the most original painters of his generation. His teaching at the Bauhaus had turned him into a sage-like figure, admired and adored by students. But beneath this brilliance, storm clouds gathered. Germany was changing. The political landscape grew darker, poisoned by extremism and fear. The avant-garde, once celebrated, now became a target. Klee, with his whimsical symbols and abstract visions, was labeled degenerate by the rising Nazi movement. His works were mocked in propaganda posters. His teaching was denounced as corrupt, un-German. In 1933, the Bauhaus itself was shut down under Nazi pressure. Klee, who had once been a celebrated professor, suddenly found himself a pariah. His home was searched, his paintings confiscated. He wrote in his diary, "My name is cursed in Germany. The light is fading and the world has gone blind. Return to Switzerland." With his career in ruins and his safety in danger, Klee fled with his family back to Switzerland, the country of his birth. But Switzerland was not entirely welcoming. He was a refugee, a man displaced, carrying the stigma of political suspicion. Financially, life became a struggle. He painted feverishly, producing hundreds of works each year, as if trying to outrun the darkness closing in on him. But there was another, more personal shadow waiting: illness. The silent enemy, scleroderma. In 1935, Klee began to suffer mysterious symptoms. His skin grew tight, his movements painful. Breathing became difficult. Doctors eventually diagnosed him with scleroderma, a rare and incurable disease that slowly hardens the body from within. It was a cruel fate for a painter. His hands, once so precise, began to stiffen. His strength waned. Yet instead of surrendering, Klee plunged deeper into his art. "I can no longer move easily," he confided to a friend. "But my imagination has never been more free." Indeed, his late works burned with a new intensity. They were larger, bolder, filled with raw symbols and stark contrasts. Some carried titles that hinted at his struggle: Death and Fire, Stricken by Fate, Angel Still Groping. Looking at these paintings is like staring into the abyss of a man who knows his time is short but refuses to bow. The colors are darker, the lines harsher, yet there is still that unmistakable childlike spirit, fragile, trembling but unbroken. The Angels of Paul Klee. In those final years, a strange motif appeared again and again in his art: angels. But these were not the serene, majestic beings of religious tradition. Klee's angels were awkward, clumsy, sometimes even grotesque, half-smiling, half-weeping figures caught between worlds. Critics have often said that these angels were Klee himself, creatures suspended between life and death, between hope and despair, between the earth and some unreachable realm beyond. One angel he called Angel of Death. Another, Angel of the Future. And most haunting of all, Angel Still Groping, a small, almost childlike figure, lost in uncertainty, searching for something it cannot find. They were his companions in suffering. His silent testimony that even in weakness, creation persists. The Last Battle. By 1940, Klee's condition had worsened. He was bedridden for long stretches, racked with pain. Yet astonishingly, he continued to paint. Friends described his studio as both heartbreaking and miraculous. A man whose body was failing, still summoning visions from within, still putting brush to canvas even as his strength dissolved. It was as if he were racing against death itself, desperate to leave behind a final message. In that single year, he created more than 1,200 works, an almost superhuman outpouring. One of his last paintings, Death and Fire, 1940, shows a skull-like face, the word Tod, German for death, hidden within its lines. It is stark, chilling, yet not without a strange calm. It feels less like fear and more like acceptance. On June 29, 1940, Paul Klee died in Locarno, Switzerland at the age of 60. He left behind not only thousands of works of art but also an entire philosophy, that art is not merely a reflection of the visible, but a portal to the invisible. Legacy of a dreamer. After his death, his reputation only grew. The Nazis who had condemned him were defeated, but Klee's paintings endured. Today, his works hang in the world's greatest museums, admired for their mystery, their playfulness, their profound humanity. He once wrote, "Art does not reproduce the visible, it makes visible." This perhaps is his truest legacy. Klee painted what cannot be seen: the dreams of a child, the terror of war, the whispers of angels, the thin veil between life and death. His canvases remain like fragments of a secret language, one that speaks not to the eye alone but to the soul. Part 4, The Eternal Echo. The room where Paul Klee died in 1940 was quiet. Outside, the Swiss air carried the faint sound of church bells. Inside, the brushes were still, the palette cold. And yet, it is said that on his final day his hands, frail and trembling, reached for a pencil one last time. As if he could not leave without marking the page, without leaving one final trace. Some say it was only a line, a broken curve that led nowhere. Others insist it was the beginning of another angel, incomplete, unfinished, forever searching. Whatever it was, it remains a mystery swallowed by silence. But perhaps that is fitting. For Klee himself once wrote, "A line is a dot that went for a walk." And maybe, when his body failed, his soul became that line, continuing the walk beyond the canvas, beyond the world. The whisper of colors. Klee's paintings, scattered now across the globe, seem alive. Stand before them long enough and you might feel them breathe. They whisper with the innocence of childhood, yet tremble with the weight of mortality. They are fragile, playful, terrifying, like life itself. Critics call him many things, a surrealist, a modernist, a dreamer. But none of those titles capture the strange, magnetic pull of his work. To look at a Klee is to enter another dimension, a place where the visible dissolves into the invisible, where reality gives way to possibility. It is as though he painted not the world, but its secret heartbeat. A man of two worlds. In the end, Paul Klee was never fully at home in this life. He stood always between Germany and Switzerland, between childhood and adulthood, between tradition and revolution, between the material and the spiritual. Even in his final years, when pain consumed his body, his imagination soared elsewhere. The angels he painted were not guardians or judges, but companions. They were awkward, uncertain, broken, and yet they carried him toward something beyond death, beyond the reach of time. The eternal message. Today, nearly a century after his passing, Klee's works continue to draw millions. Children laugh at their playfulness. Scholars dissect their hidden codes. Artists find themselves both humbled and inspired. But what lingers most is not the technique, nor the symbolism. It is the sense that through his art, Paul Klee was whispering directly to us. Do not look only at the world you see. Look deeper. Look where your eyes cannot follow. There, in the invisible, lies the truth. The final vision. Imagine for a moment Klee's last angel, unfinished, trembling, searching. Imagine it hovering above his bed as he took his final breath. Not triumphant, not perfect, but still moving forward, still seeking. That angel is Paul Klee himself. Not frozen in death, but still on his endless journey, a dot walking forever into the unknown. And so, every time we stand before his paintings, we are not simply looking at art. We are standing at the edge of a doorway. A doorway into the invisible, left open by a man who lived between worlds. A man named Paul Klee.